Welcome back to Pause to Unedit Yourself, where reflection meets transformation. A podcast that gives you permission to press pause and offers a reflective space for self inquiry. I'm your host, Anushka, and each episode I will be sharing bite sized insights, a collection of thoughts and reflections on topics that I have pondered on through my own journey of introspection, soulful insights that have helped me in the hope it will help you too on your path of personal evolution. Whether you're feeling stuck, searching for clarity, or simply wanting to expand, my hope is that this podcast becomes a space of inspiration and deep remembering for you to evolve from within and uncover the infinite potential that exists inside each and every one of you. Thank you to each and every one of you who continue to tune in on each of the episodes and for your continued feedback. It really does help me and gives me that motivation to carry on and know that these insights do reach those that need to hear it. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Today's episode, I have been working on for quite a while. It's something that I've been trying to get to grips with and understand. It's something that I've basically spoken about on previous episodes, but it's one that I want to get to the crux of today, and that is ego. And how I began this journey of understanding the ego and started questioning it is because someone once told me in a conversation was I tried to let go of any ego that I have. And this comment somehow didn't really sit well with me. And it really made me question and lead me down this rabbit hole of understanding why this comment didn't sit well with me. And in reality, what the ego was. And it took me a while to research and understand. And in today's episode, what I have tried to do is to break it down as much as possible. So let's start with understanding what is ego and how does it shape us. And so ego, we understand it to be as when we say somebody has ego, we understand that to be that somebody is self centered, right? That person has a lot of ego. But the other side of ego is actually your identity. Okay. So it is the layers of identity and programs that really shape who you are and clouds your true authentic nature. This ego, it lives in lack of awareness, it lives in fear. And your authentic self is pure love and is abundant and in nature, and it's free. And ego is not who you really are. The ego is this filter through which we interpret and define our lives. It is your self image, it is your social mask, it is the role you are playing. And it's not just a sense of self confidence or self promotion, but what I've come to realize that is actually this collection of beliefs and fears and desires that create an identity to help us navigate this world. What happens is that this identity becomes a social mask that we wear to feel secure and feel recognized. And yes, it thrives on approval, but somehow it's also rooted in something much less stable. It's that insecurity, it's that fear, it's that past conditioning. And really, it's from a young age that we start to develop the ego. And how that comes about, if you think about it, we're all born love. That's our true nature is pure, and it's love. And the ego gets developed as we start to absorb the lessons about what it means to be good, what it means to be successful, what it needs to be worthy. And what happens is that this ego, it starts to seek the security in these definitions and comparisons that we are taught from a very young age in our families, through our parents, our primary caregivers. And what happens is that, this ego seeks a security in these definitions and comparisons. And in doing so, what it does is that it creates this life that is so structured around our perceived needs, fears, and self images. And what I've come to understand is that the ego's purpose, and although it's valuable, it is primarily survival based. It's the part of us that wants to avoid pain, and it ensures our safety. So, what does the ego look like, and how can you recognize it? This took me a while to understand, because after recognizing what it is, it's like, well, how does it actually kind of show up in my everyday life? Well, to identify the ego, we can really start by peeling back its many layers. You see, the ego, as I've discovered, it manifests as our thoughts, our beliefs, our labels, and concepts that shape our perception of reality. It's driven by fears, by desires, by expectations, by social conditioning, and all of the stories that we tell ourselves about who we are, what we need. And ultimately, ultimately, your ego is the sum of all your experiences. Think about that. Because without your ego, who would you be? That is that question. And at its core, the ego is rooted in fear. It's the part of us that desires control and security. And that is often through manipulation or compliance with social norms. So think about this when you're being judgmental and that desire to be right. See that the ego judges and categorizes everything. It clings to past hurts and traumas and fears, and it uses them as protection against any threats that it perceives. And so then this ends up creating this loop where we project our past wounds onto present situations. And then this leads us to react instead of respond. That's that ego. Every time that we react, that's the ego. It's not our awareness, it's our ego that's coming into play. And the ego, it likes this loop because it's what feels comfortable. It feels safe, and this is all it knows. So you think about every time that you react to something, when you are triggered in any kind of situation, when you feel angry, or you feel anxious, or you feel overwhelmed, or that you kind of lash out. That's the ego, because it is trying to create that safety net. Um, However, in contrast, our soul, which is love, it's truth, it's courage, it's freedom, it's peace, and it really comes from a place of response, which is rooted in that awareness. And so, when you hear about a lot of mindfulness practices, they talk a lot about this aspect of awareness. Be aware, become more conscious. Another way that you can recognize ego is that it shows up in insecurity or being unable to let go or surrender. And this is because the purpose of the ego is to provide us with security. But ironically, its very nature, it's insecure because it's always searching for validation and approval. And it's always kind of relying on external factors to build that sense of identity. Can you see how that is? And so that ego becomes this master of manipulation because it starts shaping our perception of reality based on its own judgment and expectations, not on our true self, not on our authentic self, but something that we have created. And another way that you can recognize the ego or and how it kind of shows up, it's that fear of unknown. And we've all been there. I know I've certainly been there. It's that fear of the unknown where the ego tells us what to avoid, what we fear the most. And this can basically hinder our growth. And I've done a previous episode on embracing change. So do have a listen to that as I kind of deep dive into overcoming and embracing change and stepping into the unknown. And so what I've understood is that most often when what we fear most is exactly what we need to face to evolve, for our highest good, to become the highest expression of ourselves. And so the destiny of the ego, it's not to overpower, but it is to surrender to it. It's to move beyond its need to control and embrace the unknown with trust and openness. So, with all of that said and done, we talk about like the ego, and then we have our authentic self, our true self. So, how can you recognize the differences and how does that show up? So, while the ego judges and protects, and it's really fueled by that fear, on our true self, it exists beyond all the stories and labels that we have collected. You see, our true self is expansive and is connected to the present moment. It's unattached to any external validation or past conditioning. And it's ultimately grounded in awareness and love rather than the fear and judgment. You see, our true self, it thrives on authenticity. It's the freedom and peace. And on the other hand, the ego can sometimes trap us in these patterns of comparison and control. And that's how you can recognize it. Any kind of situation, look, am I being, you know, is my ego coming to play? Am I comparing something? Am I trying to control something? So when we identify with that ego, we feel the need that we have to prove ourselves, to strive and to fulfill certain expectations. And in doing so, we end up masking that natural joy and creativity that can come from just being. So here are some ways where you can see how the ego shows up versus where something is coming from your true self, from your soul. So, firstly, the ego is always in a rush all the time. It's impatient. It's chasing a goal. Versus the soul is in no rush because it knows that it's eternal and it enjoys the journey, not the destination. It's not rushing to a destination. The ego, it focuses on flaws, on comparison, on lack. But the soul knows it's abundant and it wants everyone to live their fullest life. The operation system of the ego is rooted in lack and fear, whereas the soul is unconditional love and abundance. The ego, it seeks validation and approval, and it seeks so hard to fit into society, versus the soul knows that it is not for everyone and everyone is not for them. The ego, it seeks love outside to complete it, but the soul values its own unconditional love above all external validation. The ego wants to serve itself, but the soul wants to be of service. The ego, it fears making mistakes, but the soul knows mistakes are part of the soul development. The ego sees value in everything that is in scarce, in money and in physical beauty. But the soul, sees value in everything that is abundant, in love, in presence. So you might be asking at this stage, well, this is great, a lot to kind of unpack here. But what if the ego didn't exist? Well, so imagine a life without the need to label yourself or prove your worth, where every single action, it's not a reaction to fear or past experiences, but rather it's a genuine expression of your inner self. You see, without ego, we would move through life with a sense of freedom, and we wouldn't have this burden of all the stories or these judgments about who we are or how we are perceived. But there's one thing I have also realized from everything that I've learned, and is that this journey, it's not to eliminate the ego. It is about bringing awareness to it, to understand its role, and to move beyond its limitations. So, how do you develop awareness around the ego? Well, awareness is our bridge from ego to our true self. And what this is the skill of observing the mind's patterns without becoming entangled in them. So it starts by paying attention to moments where the ego really wants to assert itself. And that could be, as I mentioned previously, like through comparison, through control, or parts when you are being defensive. And it's not about rejecting the feelings that come up, because you should feel those emotions. But it's about recognizing what comes up without judgment. And that's a hard part, because you're observing, you want to feel, you want to express, but you want to be doing that without judgment. So, for example, like, when you're hearing this negative self thought that might come up and says, I'm not good enough. And so, rather than immediately identifying with it, ask yourself, is this truly who I am? What would happen if I didn't believe this? And this line of sort of like gentle questioning, it starts to help loosen that grip of the ego, and it starts to open up the door to self-discovery. And that is the whole purpose of this podcast, is to help you on that journey of self-inquiry. So a few other uh, things that you can be conscious about how to develop that awareness. As I said, that ego comes from fear and awareness comes from love. Ego fears making mistakes, and so it prefers to stay in that comfort zone where your soul, it knows that for it to grow, it needs to try new experiences, without that fear of the outcome. It just needs to create. Ego is always in a scarcity consciousness and awareness that your soul is abundant. It knows that it has everything that it needs. Ego, it tells us stories and it gives us reasons and to justify. And whereas your awareness is pure knowing. Ego, it's full of this melodrama and judgment, whereas the awareness is this wise creativity. Ego has this urge to judge and a desire to be constantly right. And awareness, it observes and it has a desire to understand. Ego has an attachment to identity, whereas awareness wants to let go of all identities. Ego, it really fears the unknown and has a really hard time letting go and surrendering, whereas awareness trusts your intuition. So as you move through the week, notice where the ego shows up in your life. And I'm going to leave you with a few prompts that have helped me. And they're not about judgment, but they're just to enable that curiosity and that awareness and gentle observation. So, firstly, ask yourself, when do I feel the need to be right? And what happens in my body when someone challenges me? Two, where do I compare myself the most? And in doing so, how does comparison shift my energy? And what truth might lie beneath it? Three, what stories do I tell myself to feel safe? And are these stories expanding me or keeping me small? Four, when do I notice the voice of fear? And what would love or awareness say in that same moment? And five, what masks do I wear in different spaces? And who am I without? These reflections aren't about fixing or erasing the ego, they're about seeing it. Because the moment you see it, you no longer have to unconsciously be it. And in part two, we are going to explore how to move from awareness into integration, how to shift from identifying with ego to walking alongside it as a teacher on the path to wholeness. Your time is valuable, it's the most precious commodity. So, thank you once again for being here and sharing this space with me. And thank you for pressing pause and choosing to journey inward and daring to become the highest expression of yourself. As always, I use these episodes as reminders for myself, like mini guides that you can refer to whenever you need a check in with yourself for a moment of recalibration. So do feel free to save them and share them with someone who might need to hear them. And please do share your comments and feedback too. It will help me to know what resonates for you and what you would like to hear more of. See you on the next episode.